And now we're going to turn to a view from Washington on exactly what we're seeing in the jobs numbers and those wage numbers. And we welcome now Republican Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, who's normally in Washington. I'm delighted to say he's with us in New York today. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, David.
You've been outspoken on the issue of inflation. What do you make out of these numbers?
Well, I mean, first, it is kind of amazing, the resiliency of the American consumer, this economy in the face of a major tightening, right? There's the direct effect of what the Fed's done. There's the indirect things the market has done, backing up the whole yield curve, a very strong dollar. It's surprising to me that we haven't seen a deterioration by now, even given the lags that we expect monetary policy to have. But look, I think it looks like inflation probably peaked, but we are nowhere close to having this job done yet. And so the Fed needs to stay the course, because even if it rolls over from the 8% we were running at, it wouldn't be okay if it levels off at 5%. So I'm afraid we're gonna have to continue tightening.
We're not out of the woods yet.
Right.
Let me turn back to your work in the Senate. And you're not going to renew. You decided not to re-up on this one, but we've still got a lame duck session left to go.
Right.
What, from your point of view, can be accomplished and needs to be accomplished as a lame duck?
Well, there's a few things that will certainly be accomplished, right? So a National Defense Authorization bill is pretty much ready to go. I think that passes soon. There's got to be one way or another to fund the government. There's really two ways, as you know, David, right? We could do a continuing resolution, which is what we call just continuing everything as is, or we could do what we call an omnibus, where we sort of reconfigure things and we spend create a new spending bill. So those are the two options. One of those is going to pass before the end of the year, in fact before December 16th, because that's when the current funding expires. Then there's a lot of miscellaneous things that could find their way into that final spending bill. I'll tell you one category that I'm still hoping, and I know it's getting tougher every day, but what I'm hoping is that we do something to provide some legislation and regulatory clarity in the crypto space. We have nothing. We have complete regulatory uncertainty, legal uncertainty, and that leads to all kinds of problems, including, by the way, the migration of money and activity and entrepreneurs and developments to overseas jurisdictions, where, as we've seen, regulations aren't so good.
So you've been outspoken on this before, and it's not like there's nothing going on in the crypto space. I mean, just mention FTX and Samuel Bankman-Fried was happening there. I know the House is having hearings before the year is out. Is the Senate, you're the ranking member of the Banking Committee, are you going to have hearings, and if so, when?
So I think so, but I'm the ranking member, not the chairman, so I don't get to make that call unilaterally, but I think we're going to have a hearing. I hope we do. I think we should have Sam Bankman-Fried at the hearing. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's important for us to expose here, and this is an important distinction in my mind. What happened at FTX is horrendous, right? It looks like just gross mismanagement. It looks like total lack of proper governance and controls and really bad behavior by some individuals. It's not specific to the underlying asset. We have seen this happen time and time again throughout history with fiat currency and ordinary assets. It's unfortunately not that uncommon a story. So we shouldn't confuse the bad actors of some individuals with an underlying asset that, the code isn't guilty of anything here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, commingling assets is something we've seen other places. It doesn't take crypto to do that.
Exactly. You can do that with anything, and people have.
Yeah, exactly. So you've had a distinguished career in the U.S. Senate, and you accomplished a lot of things. I'm curious, what do you think is one of the things you're proudest of that you got done? And then I will turn to what has yet to be done that you're not going to get to.
So I would say my biggest accomplishment was the role I was able to play in helping to formulate and pass the 2017 tax reform. It's indisputable that it was like the most transformative tax reform since the 1980s. Maybe it goes further back than that. And I think it was extremely constructive. I think it's worth remembering, we passed the reform at the end of 2017. It went into effect in 2018. 2019, it's arguably the best economic year of my lifetime. I mean, strong economic growth. We were hitting record low unemployment levels, record low unemployment for all kinds of subsets of our population, African American, Hispanics. We had very low inflation. We had wage growth that was exceeding the rate of inflation. And by the way, wage growth was fastest for the lowest income Americans, so we were narrowing the wage gap. And now, where are we today? So obviously, we then went through this terrible pandemic and all the disruption from that. But here we are today. The federal government is taking in more revenue now under our reform code than was projected to come in under the old code. And even corporate tax rate, right? We took the corporate rate from 35 to 21. Corporate tax revenue is running above its historical average as a percentage of the economy and as a percentage of total revenue. So I would say it's an unqualified success.
But some of those provisions are going to expire, particularly with respect to expensing capital investment.
Right.
And what are the prospects in the new Congress of extending those?
So that's going to be a big challenge, and you're absolutely right. And that's, I think, one of the most constructive elements, right? By allowing full expensing on CapEx, you lower the after-tax cost of making that investment, and that kind of investment is what enhances productivity, leads to stronger economic growth and rising wages, right? So that's really important that that be made permanent. And the question is, can a deal be done with a Republican House that would want to make those provisions permanent, and Democrats in the Senate who would not be very enthusiastic about it, despite the record of success? And I think that's going to be a big topic of discussion next year.
So that's one thing yet to do, or address at least, the question of the expensing of capital investment. Also, as you mentioned, crypto is something yet to be done. You've also been outspoken about the Fed and various aspects of the Fed, and not least the regional presidents and exactly how they're chosen in the review process. We now have a new nominee for Chicago, new president of the Chicago Fed, in Austin Goolsbee, whom we know well, distinguished economist, although part of the Obama administration. Do you have hopes, in effect, there will be real reform in that area as you see it?
So, you know, I think we need more transparency in that area. I've been arguing that we ought to be able to, we in Congress who have the responsibility of oversight, after all, let's be clear, Congress delegates its authority to the Federal Reserve to conduct monetary policy and to supervise our big financial institutions. That's ultimately our responsibility to conduct that oversight. We need to have information, and that has not always been forthcoming. I'm also concerned that the regional banks in particular have really strayed outside of the monetary and regulatory mandate of the Fed. We saw the leader of the Minneapolis Fed actively lobbying for education reform, K through 12 education reform in Minnesota, in a partisan way that's completely outside of the mandate. So, yeah, Mr. Goolsbee is certainly academically and professionally qualified, but he has had a political past, and I hope that he kind of checks that at the door when he goes into the job, because this shouldn't be a politicized institution.
It shouldn't be, but what is politicized is the Senate. I want to ask one last question about Pennsylvania. There's going to be a new senator now. It's going to be a Democrat succeeding you, and not a Republican. What happened there?
Well, I was surprised. I think Dr. Oz is actually a good candidate who ran a good campaign. He had the very difficult challenge of going through a very bloody primary, got beat up to a very large degree. And then at the top of the ticket, our gubernatorial nominee was losing the state by epic proportions. I mean, he lost by 15 points in a state that almost never goes by a margin that big. That's a lot of headwind for everybody who's down ballot. And Dr. Oz was not able to overcome that headwind. I mean, he lost by, I think, about 4 points. It's a lot better than 15, but it doesn't get you across the goal line. I think in the end, it was an environment that was just really tough. I
want to be very careful with one thing. We were talking about Samuel Bankman-Fried, and you said gross mismanagement, which I think personally he's admitted to. He said that he wasn't paying enough attention. You weren't necessarily accusing him of anything, any wrongdoing, any criminal wrongdoing, because we don't know what happened.
We don't know. I mean, look, there's some apparently very bad things happened, and in the United States of America, taking customers' money and lending it to your affiliated hedge fund is probably a criminal violation. I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer at all, but I'm pretty sure that would violate a lot of serious laws. I'm not sure, given that he was doing this, or whatever he was doing, was taking place in the Bahamas.
It's going to have to be a lot of investigation done before we know. Thank you so much, Senator. It's always such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania.